Overgate Hospice, Yorkshire. Alice has been moved here for treatment to ease her intense pain. The doctors gave her 6 months to live, and already she survived for 1 month beyond that. Alice has now requested compensation from her former employer. She's certain her cancer is due to their failure to provide safe working conditions. Throughout Britain, there are 800 workplaces using asbestos, 32 of them large factories. It's a multi-million-dollar industry. To promote asbestos, the industry produces a steady supply of glossy brochures. In 1976, nationwide advertising like this cost them over $2 million. Turner & Newell, which has several American subsidiaries, is the most powerful company in the industry. Gross income, $995 million. This is their Rochdale factory, the biggest asbestos textile plant in Europe. It was here that Samuel Turner began using asbestos 103 years ago. Turner's prides itself on its pioneering work in health and safety. In 1920, they said, "The workshop shall be as a sanctuary to which men shall enter with joy in their hearts and laughter in their eyes." Refused permission to film inside, we stopped workers and asked them how much they knew about asbestos disease. Turners are clear. All workers are fully informed.
Do you know what diseases you can get from asbestos?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
Do you know what diseases you can get from
asbestos?
asbestos?
I do, yes.
Well, can you tell me what they are?
Asbestosis, for one.
Have you ever heard of mesothelioma?
I've heard of it, yes.
Do you know what it is?
A very chronic chest complaint,
Yeah.
isn't it?
It's cancer. Do you know?
Well.
Did you know that?
For 50 years, Turner's has been Britain's showpiece asbestos factory. Since the 1920s, every investigation into asbestos disease, not just in Britain, but also in the United States, has depended upon evidence from here. The latest report came from the government's 1977 Asbestos Commission, which was concerned with the increasing death rate in British factories. Evidence from Turner's model factory was central in the conclusions of the final government report, published 2 years later. Turner's are proud of the cleanliness in this factory. Thousands of dollars have been spent on equipment, the monitoring of the asbestos dust, and the regular medical checkups seem impressive. In 1978, Turners were very confident of conditions inside the factory. They told their unions, "It's extremely unlikely that anyone commencing work at TBA will have his health affected at all." However, scientists from Oxford University predict that after a lifetime's work here, the number of these workers who will die of mesothelioma, lung cancer, or chest disease may be as high as 1 out of 10. Turner's also told the Asbestos Commission that in the weaving shed, which for 30 years has kept to below the legal limits for asbestos dust, they had no disease whatsoever, that not one single weaver has contracted asbestos-related disease. But what about this man who worked in the weaving shed? Records show he had suspected asbestosis fully 8.5 years before Turner stated to the Commission that they had no disease at all among weavers. He wasn't the only one, as these records from that same year, 1977, show. The number of weavers with suspected asbestosis? 13. Turner's also stated that they had 48 cases of mesothelioma, but that none of these could be described as cases of slight exposure to asbestos. Margaret Crimes worked here as Turner's receptionist. Emma Marshall was Turner's office cleaner. They both died of mesothelioma. This is Turner's own company list of mesotheliomas. Among them, the exposure times, 16 months, 1 year, 7 months, 5 months, 3 years, and the last one, a woman exposed for just 10 days. In this union-sponsored questionnaire, Turner said the number of mesotheliomas in the previous 4 years was just 3. By examining the death certificates in the same period, we found 6. Turner's also told the unions at the same time the level of asbestosis between 1950 and 1979 was just 20. We found 81. We looked at another of Turner's factories, Glasgow. For nearly 40 years, Turners dumped waste asbestos into a huge hole at their factory here. Children could easily get into the 18-acre site. Tons of asbestos slid into the River Clyde. In 1981, at public expense, the huge tip was properly covered. The job was so dangerous that workmen had to wear full protective clothing.
I'm on record as calling it a biological bomb, and that's sincerely what I believe it to be. It's a long-term health hazard, and this has been blowing about asbestos just in this area for very many years. And the results of that, I'm quite certain, will lead to deaths. No one knows how many in the coming years. This is a sort of tragic memorial to my mind for the future. This site has now just got to stay sterile for eternity, as far as I can see. And that's what Turners have left to Clyde Bank.
And what kind of legacy has Turners left overseas? Turner & Newell is a huge multinational with asbestos interests in over 20 different countries. Are the conditions there up to British standards? In India, Turners have interests in 5 factories. This is Bombay. As health regulations have tightened at home, Western asbestos companies have moved into the third world. This Indian factory was opened by Turners in the 1930s, a few years after the first regulations were introduced into Britain. It may have seemed benign paternalism then to build housing and schools within the factory compound. Now we know that for young children to live next door to a factory must be highly dangerous. But in 1982, they still do. Particularly dangerous when just a few yards down from the school and houses, we found piles of scattered asbestos waste open to any adventurous child. One X-ray study here showed that 352 men, that's well over 1 in 3 workers, had some form of asbestosis. This little boy is playing on a pile of asbestos waste in front of an American-owned factory. At a recent conference, an industry executive stated, "The third world provides a rosy glow in the industry's crystal ball." After months of waiting, Alice has finally received a small offer of compensation from Cape Asbestos.
I was really insulted because they don't know how I feel. And you know, for a week of this pain, what they offered me wouldn't compensate. It wouldn't. And they offered me 13,000. And I mean, my husband's 65. And how long is he going to be here? And you know, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, I wouldn't, honest. Not this. It's... I don't know. Yeah, you said, what do I think about Cape? I hate him. I bloody hate him. I don't know who I hate though, do I? Because Cape's just a word.
Leeds High Court. Alice must go to court in person to convince the judge she's entitled to a more generous settlement.
Well, I don't think I should have had to do it in the first place. Not at this time or any other time, because, and especially this morning, because I've had a right rough night. And I've had 3 right rough nights. I've been walking the floor like I used to do with a baby. It hurts that much. I'm going into hospital tomorrow, by the way.
Today?
Today, when I've been here.
What the call?
So, I'm hoping they'll be able to do something.
However much compensation you get today, is it any compensation at all really for you?
Well, what good is it now? It's no good now, is it? It's no good at all. Not as far as I'm concerned.
In Britain, most asbestos victims do not go to court. But in America, the courtroom has become the centre of the asbestos controversy. A wealthy suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. An asbestos widow, Dana Bond, sued the manufacturer of a product her husband had once used. Richard Bond had worked for just a few months with asbestos, using a process invented by Turner & Newell, exported to America. 16 years later, this healthy, fit man developed mesothelioma. His lawyers recorded this tape.
Are you suffering a particular illness at this time, sir? Do you understand what it is or what they call it?
Mesothelioma, asbestosis.
Asbestosis and mesothelioma.
3 days after this testimony was taken, Richard Bond died, aged 32. Turners and their American partners made legal history when they paid his widow $1,400,000 in compensation. But even in America, sums that large are highly unusual. Ron Motley is one of the lawyers representing asbestos claimants in the United States.
The asbestos companies and their insurers are bemoaning the fates and saying we're going to go bankrupt, something's got to be done. Well, it's my opinion they ought to go bankrupt. And I will personally be delighted if every asbestos company in the United States goes bankrupt and every one of their insurance carriers suffers a loss, because it was the asbestos companies and their insurance companies who had the knowledge and could have stopped this epidemic of death and disease that we have in the United States from the sale of asbestos fibers. They knew. An insurance company in the United States as early as 1918 refused to insure people exposed to asbestos because they knew it caused harm. And for 50 to 60 years, with this knowledge, they kept selling it and didn't tell people. So anything that happens to the asbestos companies, they deserve. If they go bankrupt, they deserve it.
Overgate Hospice, Yorkshire, England. Once again, Alice has been moved in here. She seems to be improving. News of her court case against Cape has come through.
What did you say when you heard about your settlement in court?
Well, a bit upset, really. Because you don't come to realise until you get a settlement made and realise what it is they're making it on. And when my husband come to me, he says, well, did you send 36,000? And I says, well, it's a new body I want. And £36,000 won't buy that. You just can't give in, can you? You owe it to yourself and to your family to keep fighting, don't you? And when you get knocked down, get up and stand there again. And then have another go at you. You've got to have some, haven't you? I mean, just because we worked to that mill all them years ago doesn't mean to say we can't fight back. Is it? So... And that's the sort of people mill workers are around here. They all fight back. Well, they try to do, you know, but when you're dead you can't, can you? So you might as well struggle on while you're alive. Do your fighting then. So, just have to keep going on and putting up with it, the pain and everything.
A few weeks later, Alice died in her sleep. She was just 48. Last year, worldwide asbestos output rose by 2.4%. As third world demand increases, output is expected to double by the end of the century. In 1982, Turner & Newell publicly stated, much of the steam has gone out of the anti-asbestos lobby. There is not that much concern in the United Kingdom. 3 months before broadcast, we asked Turner & Newell to answer the serious questions raised in this film. Later, we repeated the offer. Negotiations were not complete when its programme was finalised. When this film was shown in Britain in July 1982, the impact was enormous. Thousands of viewers wrote to us
deeply moved by Alice's story, wanting to help her family and the other victims of asbestos disease. Asbestos workers went on strike against their employers to improve their working conditions. Members of Parliament challenged the validity of the current regulations governing the use of asbestos, and millions of dollars were wiped off the stock exchange value of the large asbestos companies.
One of the main concerns today is with the 30 million tons of asbestos already in place. It's widely used in the construction industry. Up until 1973, it was sprayed on steel supports, like these in the World Trade Center. Asbestos provides insulation and fireproofing in thousands of buildings across the country. Workers were exposed during construction. Now every time maintenance or repair work is done, asbestos can get into the air. Whole communities are exposed whenever old buildings are demolished. Thousands of workplaces, like this police station, are no longer safe. With increasing awareness have come efforts to remove or seal off the asbestos in thousands of public buildings. Only 2 decades ago, asbestos were required for fire protection in schools. Today, the EPA has ordered an investigation the potential health hazards of more than 100,000 schools across America. Loose fibers are dangerous when inhaled, so some schools, like Newton North High in Massachusetts, spent nearly $1 million eliminating their asbestos hazard. Asbestos removal is costly. Without some financial assistance, for most schools, such removal is impossible. In 1970, the US government passed the Occupational Safety and Health Act. OSHA's first priority was to regulate asbestos use in the workplace. Relying largely on British evidence, they determined that it was safe to inhale 2 fibers per cubic milliliter of air each hour. But can there really be a safe level of exposure to asbestos?
A man who works inhales somewhere around a cubic meter of air, which is 1,000,000 milliliters. So that if you allow him to breathe in 2 fibers per milliliter, you're saying that you can breathe in 2 million fibers each hour.
In addition, millions of smaller ones, which escape detection by the monitoring equipment, are also inhaled. These fibers are surrounded by tissue and magnified 16,000 times. Research shows that even the smallest fibers can cause cancer.
The 2-fiber standard is, among scientists, widely known to be unsafe. And here we are. People are being allowed to work in circumstances in which they're breathing in a great deal of asbestos. Not like 30 years ago, not like 20 years ago, but still much more than we could do away with at the present time.
The British government, within a week of the broadcast of this film, decided to officially reduce their 2-fiber standard by half. In 1984, the level will probably be reduced even further. The public debate in America is still about the past. Who will pay for this monumental tragedy? How will these victims be compensated? And who will take the responsibility? While this controversy dominates newspapers and courtrooms, a small experiment is underway in central Pennsylvania. Port Allegheny was a typical rural town until an asbestos insulation manufacturing plant began operation. 1,100 workers were exposed to varying amounts of asbestos between 1964 and 1972, the 8 years the plant was open. In 1973, the Factory Workers Union, concerned about the lives of its members, alerted Pittsburgh Corning to the seriousness of the problem. After 4 years of tough negotiations, Pittsburgh Corning finally agreed to pay for the first years the comprehensive medical surveillance program. The Port Allegheny Asbestos Health Program is the only one of its kind in the country. From this office, eligible workers are tracked down and enrolled in the program, where their health care is carefully monitored. Family members whose exposure came from dust brought into the home are also examined.
Asbestos health program is a fiancé.
Under the direction of a community board, the union and the company work together for the success of the health program. The emphasis is on preventive health care, designed to detect disease like lung cancer in its early stages. Because prolonged exposure to asbestos damages the lungs, doctors listen for the first indication of breathing difficulties.
Normal breathing to start out.
Participants are regularly put through a battery of tests. Most look for early signs of cancer. This pulmonary function test measures lung capacity.
Push, push, push. Okay.
Kim Klein is at risk because he worked near asbestos and he smoked cigarettes.
You worked for the whole summer of '69?
Yes.
If he continues to smoke, his chances of getting lung cancer are 55 times greater than non-smokers.
Sounds to me like you're a person who can try and quit. So I encourage you to try and do that again, and we'll help you if you want us to try.
The program can alert people to their health problems. But whether or not medical surveillance can actually prolong anyone's life is still open to debate. The commitment to this health program by a company that has thousands of lawsuits against it puts Pittsburgh Corning in contrast to the largest asbestos manufacturing company in the United States.
Manville Corporation's board of directors has determined that the corporation should file for reorganization under Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Act. Though our businesses are in good shape despite the recession, we are completely overwhelmed by the cost of the asbestos health lawsuits filed against us. A recent study estimates that these may ultimately total about $52,000 and cost more than $2 billion. The Chapter 11 action might not have been necessary if the government had accepted financial responsibility for its role in causing much of the disease.
The bulk of the lawsuits now filed against Manville are from World War II shipyard workers and their families. Manville complied with the government's specific request for asbestos and now believes the government must shoulder some of the burden of these health claims. Manville has become one of the most sued companies in history. 500 lawsuits were being filed against it each month. Professor Lawrence Backow.
Once reorganization has been filed for under Chapter 11, basically all the lawsuits come to a halt. Nobody gets paid. In effect, Manville was throwing the ball back in the court of the federal government, giving the responsibility to a federal judge to determine who would get paid and how much, and at the same time also putting some pressure on Congress to try and figure out a way to pay all these claims and, at least from Manville's perspective, hopefully bail them out.
Chapter 11 allows Manville to continue business as usual. At the same time, they're lobbying for the establishment of a federal compensation fund. There are several bills pending now in Congress. Manville is behind a government-industry 50-50 plan. However, Professor Backow believes industry should pay for a hefty share.
If government steps in and takes responsibility for paying off all these claims, I think industry will get the wrong message. If industry has to pay, then the cost of those payments to workers ultimately will be incorporated in the price of the products. As a result, the price of the products will be higher than they would otherwise. This will give industry an incentive to minimize the risks. It will give industry an incentive to look for alternative products which don't create risks. It will give industry an incentive to do research which can try and avoid these problems in the first place.
The tragic story of asbestos should be a warning to us all, a lesson that we should prevent a similar disaster from ever happening again. Meanwhile, the price we've paid for that bitter lesson has been high, paid for in the lives of ordinary people like Alice, who just went to work every day believing it was safe. Ordinary people from all over the world. The decisions we make today will be the legacy we leave to our children and to our children's children.
Thank you.